Alright, in this tutorial I'm going to walk through the process of setting up an exploded axon diagram so that you can export it to Illustrator and tweak it there so that you can clearly communicate how the different layers of your model come together. So I'm going to start from where I left off with the previous video where we have our different curve network layers warped and interleaved. I'm going to assume that you've taken care of that and that you don't have things like this where things intersect. You've resolved all those weaving issues. And then I'm going to start separating these things. Now, there's two aspects to this. The first one that I'm not going to go over so much in this video is that you are going to need, for this assignment, a model that has all of these elements together in one view, one 3D model. That's one part of the assignment. The other part of the assignment is explaining how that happened, and that's done through, or how those things came together, and that's through diagrammatic representations that show movement in 3D, and then the other is the whole exploded axonometric diagram. And so I'm going to talk about the last part, that exploded axon, and walk you through getting that ready. First thing I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to model my base for this diagram. So based on the assignment earlier, which was a 10-inch by 10-inch piece of foam core, I'm just going to draw that 10-inch by 10-inch square, 10 by 10. And then I'm going to extrude that. Now I could have just drawn a box from the get-go. That would have been just as easy, or perhaps easier. I could just, draw that box and give it a height, such as what was it? I'll just say 1/4 of an inch for this. So that is one way I could model that. Otherwise, I could just draw the square and extrude it, which would result in the same thing. So now I have a base, because that's going to be part of my exploded diagram. And now I'm going to start just taking each layer and moving it into 3D, or separating each layer. So that's kind of the same process that I was doing yesterday, but now these are distorted layers, except for this one isn't so distorted, but it's not such a big deal. I'm just going to do that here just so it looks a little more interesting. Alright, so now I'm moving these up different levels, roughly in the, you want to roughly keep the top ones above the ones that are below, but obviously since they are woven together, there isn't strictly going to be one layer that's fully above or below another layer, because they're woven together. And that's why the other diagram, the one that shows how these items were moved in 3D from a flat diagram, is important for communicating the relationship between these layers and how they're woven together. Alright, so I'm just going to keep doing this here until I've got them all separated. Now, your view here is going to be really important. What you see in the view on your screen is actually going to be what we're exporting. So I actually am going to need to move these in much greater increments here so that they're separate and I can actually see the separate layers individually without any overlap. If there is any overlap, you can work with that, but you're going to have to clearly communicate which ones are blocking the others. You'll have to, look at what kind of overlap we're dealing with. All right, so it's fine to overlap the base, but we want to try and separate these a little as much as possible. All right, so the other component of this is going to be getting your view right in terms of the perspective. So I mentioned before in class that I want a parallel projection. Right now you can see that these perspective lines are converging in the distance. That means it's not a parallel projection. It's a per 2-point or 3-point perspective. So what we're going to do here is we're going to switch to that parallel projection, and that's going to be under your set view for the current view, isometric, and you can pick a direction. I think if I want to keep with my X and Y axes the way that they are by default, probably want to go with southwest, actually. So now there's my x-axis and there's my y-axis. Doesn't matter too much, but if that helps you orient yourself, you can do that. Alright, so now you can see that those lines, well, we expect them to converge in the distance, but they don't, so it looks kind of bizarre. But what this is going to do is it's going to make sure that all of these lines are parallel, so that we don't get any weird distortion when it comes to the way that these different items are separated, and so that we can draw lines in diagrammatic lines that make sense in 3 dimensions. Okay, so I want to model now my pins, which will be an important part of this diagram. And if I want this to look right, I'm going to need to put some thought into the dimensions here. So I'm going to start with the head of the pin at the end. I'm going to start modeling this upside down and just pick a spot. And now for the diameter of my pin head, I'm going to use 1/16 of an inch. That seems reasonable. And then I'm going to say that the pin head is just a 64th of an inch thick. Alright, there's my pin head, and then I'm going to draw another cylinder, and from the center I'm going to call the diameter of the main part of the pin 1/32 of an inch, and then my pin is roughly an inch tall. And then finally, I want to draw a cone at the top of that for the tip. So I've got my center snap on here, and when I hover on the edge of the circle, or just by it, jumps to the center. So I'm going to pick the center of my cone and then the radius of the base. There we go. And then I'll just draw this up here, like so. Alright, and now I'm going to just join those, actually just group them so that I don't have to worry about them coming apart. And now I've got my pin, and I'm going to grab it and rotate it so that it's pointing down. Alright, now I have a pin. And your pin arrangement is going to vary, so I expect you'll want to think about where these pins are located. It may actually be helpful for you to place these pins before you start separating these layers, because once they're separated, it's going to be hard to remember where they were. So before you separate all these layers, it's probably good to go in, model your pin, and place multiple copies of that pin where they actually are in your physical model, so that when you're making your axon, you're taking all of the parts that are part of the model are there before you start exploding things. Okay, so to make this a little easier on myself, I'm actually going to work with one layer at a time. You wouldn't have to do it this way, but I think it'll help a little bit. So I'm going to turn off the layers that I'm not working with for now. Okay, and I'm going to start positioning copies of this pin. Now the easiest way to do that, to get things lined up in 3D, is going to be to do this in 2D from the top. So I'm going to switch to my top view, and now I can just position these pins where I want them in my geometry, and then Control C, Control V, and then I just move it to the next place. Alright, so now I've got these pins placed over the correct spots in my model. And now when I go back here to my perspective, that's how they would all be sitting on my base. But now I want to explode this and show the relationship between these pins and the ends of my curved network layer here. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to try and position these so that they're all about the same distance above the respective points where they intersect these layers. So the way I'm going to do that, first of all, I'm going to grab all of these and move them up so that they're all separated from that base. And that way I can grab the bottom or the point at the end really easily. And now, let's see, what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to be precise about that. I'm actually going to say I want these to be an inch above. So I'm going to move these all. I'm going to use the vertical option to move these up 1 inch. Okay, so now what I'm going to do for each of these is draw a line to the base where they're coming from. I'm going to actually use the line command because it has a vertical option. So I'll do vertical and then draw from the tip of one of these down to the base, actually the top of the base. Okay, now that line is represents the relationship that I want this to have with the curved network layer. So I'm going to grab both of those and start moving that up, and then I'm going to grab the bottom of that line. Well, I have to grab both of these, but then move vertical, and I'm just going to snap that to there. Okay. Alright, and so the process then would be to do that for each of these. So I'm gonna turn off recording here and jump and go ahead and do that for all of these real quick. Alright, so now all of my pins are positioned 1 inch above each of the points on this layer where they intersect. So now what I'm going to do, because I want these lines to show actually where the pins actually connect with the base, what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend all of these lines downward. And the easiest way to do that is actually going to be to turn on the control points for each of the, or for all of these lines. So I'm going to grab those lines and then turn on the control points for them. And then to make things a little easier, I'm going to make sure that I can only select points. So I'm going to unselect using my selection filter. If you didn't turn that on before, that's on the edit menu and the selection filter. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to deselect curves, and now and I'm going to deselect surfaces, and now I can go in and really easily just select those points. And I'm just selecting the bottom point of each line. And alright, so now I just have bottom point control points of each of those lines selected. And now I can just use my gumball to extend all of those lines at once. So I'm going to extend them all way below the surface. Alright, now I can turn off those control points and turn on my selection or remove those filters and turn on my ability to select them. And I'm going to grab my base and I'm going to use the trim command and trim all of these lines off the bottom. Alright, and then right click to finish. Okay, so now all of my lines extend from my pins to the base. And that makes it pretty clear, especially the way that Rhino then hides the lines that are hidden behind each of these curved network elements. It makes it clear where the pins penetrate the surface and how they reach the base, and kind of shows their two-dimensional arrangement because of how they all reach the base. Okay, so once we get into Illustrator, then we will turn these into dotted lines to make it clear that those aren't actually part of the geometry here. But actually, what I might do to make that separation a little clearer is move these down a bit, like so, and then maybe I probably should have done that before I trimmed everything, but I can just trim everything again. Like this. Alright. Okay, so now there's a little gap between each of those pins in the line, again, to help make it clear that that's not part of the geometry, that's just going to be diagrammatic. Okay, so now that I've created all of that, I'm actually going to move it all to the next, or to the appropriate layer, so that everything is on that blue layer, and then I can just turn it off real easily. So now it's there, and I can turn off that layer, and we're back to blank canvas, and I can move on and do the same thing with my next layer. So I'm going to do that again real quick, and let's see how that looks together with the layer that we just did. Okay, now I've modeled all of those pins for this next layer, and now I'm going to go back to the layer I created before, and it's actually going to be hard to see how these all look together if they're different colors like that, so I'm actually going to move all of that back to the default layer just to make things a little more legible here. Don't need that. Okay. Default. Okay, so now they're all black. We can see now how all this can get complicated pretty quickly, but should be still fairly legible. As you get more and more layers here, it might start to get a little bit difficult to read. And you can play with things like moving your pins vertically in different directions for different layers. Just kind of see if see if you can make things a little more legible. Although it is nice if you can be consistent between, like your pin distances here. If everything's all over the place or inconsistent, it's going to look messy. One thing to help this be a little more legible in Rhino and subsequently in Illustrator, you can actually modify the way that the lines look in Rhino. I mentioned just doing that in Illustrator before, but we can do that in Rhino as well, and that's on the Drafting tab here. Normally you're in the Standard view, but if you go to the Drafting tab, there's this button here called Set Line Type. And so I can use that here and select all of my lines. And then I can click on the Set Line Type button and choose from the list here. And I'll pick this one since it's the lightest. And now I can see in Rhino what my lines are going to look like as dotted lines, and they don't get in the way quite so much and make things a little bit more legible. Now, It is going to continue to get busy as you add more, but once you have things set up like this, then you can go and start playing with how things look at a larger scale. And then when you export to Illustrator, it will actually take that line style with it. Alright, so I'm going to end this video here. I'll do another video where we talk about actually that process of bringing it into Illustrator and making it look clean in Illustrator with line weights and things like that.